Hey, greetings, everyone. Welcome to another Clear Mountain interview. We are so excited, feel very blessed to have Venerable Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo with us. Jetsunma, thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to see you again, Ajahns.
So I'll just read a quick bio for anyone who doesn't know you, one or two people. So Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo was born Diane Perry in England in 1943. Inspired by Buddhism from a young age, she traveled to India in 1964 and was ordained as one of the first Western Tibetan Buddhist nuns by His Holiness the 16th Karmapa. In training with the 8th Kamtrul Rinpoche, she subsequently undertook a strict 12-year meditation retreat in a remote Himalayan cave. Returning from retreat in 1988, she began teaching internationally at the request of her late teacher. In the decade that followed, honoring his wish to establish a nunnery, she founded Dongyu Gyatso Ling, DGL, which now houses over 100 nuns. Recognized for her spiritual accomplishments, she received the title of Jetsunma, Venerable Master, from the Drakpa Kagyu head in 2008 and continues working to promote female monasticism in Buddhism. In her 1998 biography, Cave in the Snow by Vicki McKenzie, it is a must-read. In addition to supporting the nunnery, Jetsunma also supports the Alliance of Non-Himalayan Nuns, Sakyaditi, the International Association of Buddhist Women, and the International Network of Engaged Buddhists. So we thought today that we would take a deeper dive into a text called Atisha's Lojong, Root Verses on Training the Mind. Jetsunma, could you just tell us a little bit about Atisha's verses for training the mind? It's a new text to us, but we really love it. But would like to hear a bit more about the background of it.
Lojong, the basic Lojong idea is that we take everything which happens to us, the good things and especially the difficult things, and through training our response to be, full of wisdom and compassion and patience rather than annoyance and depression and self-pity, we are able to take whatever happens to us, whatever circumstances and people that we meet with, and take everything onto the path. So that even if people are very difficult for us, we should regard that as being a good opportunity for us to cultivate patience and understanding, which if we are only with people we like, we don't get a chance to, like I always say, it's like going to a gymnasium where you have to get on those machines which are challenging in order to strengthen our muscles. If we just get the easy ones, then we won't improve. So it was very important at that time, especially for people to recognize the fundamental point that our life depends not only on what happens to us, but how we respond to what happens to us.
So, Venerable, we wanted to begin with Atisha's first verse. Mm-hmm. The supreme understanding is to realize the meaning of selflessness. Mm-hmm. And specifically, I was hoping you could speak to the dream you have described before about the prison of Samsara, just relating to this as an expression of selflessness. And it's one of the most powerful illustrations I've heard you describe.
Well, I don't remember how it connected with selflessness, but my dream was of this huge, endless prison in which we were all trapped. And some people were in the penthouse suites and, sort of drinking and partying and having a good time. And then others were working, others were arguing, others were laughing, all the way down to the dungeons where people were in total despair. But what in the dream came to me so strongly was that whether in the penthouse suite or in the dungeons, we're all in prison. And our positions in that prison can change any time, so that the people up will be down, the people down will be up. But wherever we are located, we are imprisoned. And so therefore the obvious solution was to try to get out. And in the dream, there was this river going by, well, like a kind of channel. It wasn't a big river. And I was trying to get people to come. Let's get out of here. Let's leave. And everybody said, nah, it's not so bad here. It's okay. Really, what do you expect? And also they said, leaving is very, very difficult. And it's better just to make your home where you are. But eventually, do you want me to go on?
Please.
Eventually, I persuaded 2 or 3 friends, and they said, well, if you try to escape, we'll escape too. And then there was this kind of canal running through the prison. And there were guards on either side, but when we saw this small boat, they didn't try to stop us. I thought they would try to stop us, but they didn't. We just got in the boat, and then we got outside of the prison, just like that. But there was a road running parallel to the prison. So then I started running. And I was running and running and running. And on my left side there, you could see all these windows lighted up in this huge building. And again, people laughing, people crying, people fighting, people loving, whatever. Or every window was a vignette. But it was endless. And I thought, they were right. This is not such a good idea. I'm just exhausted, and this prison is endless. And then I thought, let's go back. And then I thought, no, if I go back, they also will go back. So for their sake, I have to keep running. And so when I thought that, then suddenly the prison ended, and there was another road going across. This road was going like this, and this road was going like that. And so we went on from that. And I walked up. There was these houses, like suburbia, very nice houses with nice trees and lawns and flowers, and very nice. So I went up to the first one and knocked on the door. And this lady opened it and said, oh, you've come from that place. Not many people come here from there. And then she said, now you have to go and help all the others to also get out. And I said, I can't, it's too much. I'm just me. And so then she said, no, don't worry. The idea she gave was like there was this big organization behind who were going to be helping, like a government, sort of there were different people there. So, so they said they will help you. Don't worry. You don't have to do it by yourself. Or there's a whole setup here. So then I said, okay, and then I would do that, to try to help all the people getting out. I did explain to her that nobody seemed to want to leave. But she said, no, it doesn't matter, we're working on it. So then after I said that I would join the organization, so to speak, then I woke up.
It's a beautiful dream, and I like thinking of these Atisha verses as like prison break tools. At one point, I've heard you describe them as precepts of Lojong training, and I'm curious if you could say more about that word, because in the Theravada, we just use this word precept to refer to, if it's lay people, the 5 precepts, or as monastics, our 227 or 311 precepts. So how does one relate to these verses for training of the mind? Is it the same as precepts? I mean, it's easier to say I'm not going to kill than it is to say I'm going to give up, selfing. So how does one relate to these mind precepts?
I think the precepts in the sense that are Bodhisattva's precepts. I mean, of course, everybody, in Tibetan tradition, there are 3 levels of vows. So the first level is that of the Vinaya. So that's like the 5 precepts and the 10 precepts and, all the way up to the 364 nuns precepts. So that's like the first level. And then the second level is the Bodhisattva precepts, of which there are 48. But they are more to do with attitude. I mean, they already assume that your ethics are good. And that after all, these basic ethics are based on non-harming, right? So obviously, a bodhisattva is not going to harm. So the next level is the Bodhisattva precepts, which are more to do with your attitude and how to live harmoniously in a community. And then the third level of precepts other vows would be the tantric vows, the Vajrayana vows, of which there are numerous again. Buddhism loves vows. Have you noticed?
Venerable, on the first verse, that the supreme understanding is the understanding of selflessness, you've spoken before about this moment of a glimpse of the mind and of our sort of the divine resonance of the heart, comparing the mind to the sky, and how much of practice can be looked at as following that glimpse, trying to come back or remember it at least. What is that glimpse? Is it equivalent to Theravada stream entry, or is it just?
No, I think so. I think so. I mean, if you look at it in Zen, they have that Kensho moment when you suddenly it's like the thick clouds parting, there's the sky, then it covers up again. But now you know that all our conceptual thinking mind is just fooling us, really, that we are believing in something which is not worthy of belief. And so in that moment of recognizing our pure consciousness, I think it's the same as a glimpse of nirvana. I mean, after all, ultimate reality is ultimate reality. It can't be ultimate reality for one and a different ultimate reality. Then it's not ultimate, right? I mean, we must, all of us, not just Buddhists, but Hindus and Muslims and Christians, when you get to the great mystics, we must be talking about the same thing. Because otherwise, how many ultimates do we have? I mean, it has to be that we actually realize and recognize a level of awareness and of consciousness beyond the conceptual. But then we have to describe it in whatever terms we used in a way to get there, right? So then sometimes it sounds different, but actually, really, we're just looking at the same thing from different angles.
Thank you. And for those of us who are still trapped in this prison, or maybe doing our best to run alongside it, I mean, when we talk about the vision of the ultimate or the nature of mind, it can seem distant and intimidating. What would you say to a layperson or even a monastic who just hears about stream entry or the glimpse of the true nature of the heart and mind and thinks it's beyond them?
Well, the Tibetans say that the nature of the mind, this ultimate nature of the mind, Dhammakaya, is so close that we don't see it. They say it's like the eyelashes. They're so close that the eye doesn't see them, and the eye is looking out and doesn't see something because it's too close. So basically what they're talking about is this level of underlying awareness that we all have, because you can hear me and see, and I mean, we're conscious, but we're not conscious of being conscious. And that's the problem, that we can't just relax and just recognize what is already there, but we're overlooking it because we're looking at something much more exciting. In fact, sometimes they say that it's so ordinary. In the Mahamudra, it's called the ordinary mind. It's so ordinary that we don't recognize it. So like space, right? And because space is everywhere, but because you can't see and grasp it and taste it and touch it, we don't recognize it. But nothing could exist if it wasn't for space. Nothing could exist if we weren't conscious. It's also a level of knowing before the dualistic split into knower and known. You understand? So it's always there, but we get trapped in our dualistic thinking.
Venerable, in your experience, are there glimpses of this before the utterly life-transforming deep glimpse that, may be equivalent to stream entry, say like non-dual perceptions? Just someone is able to experience that what's inside and what's outside are less distinct than most people conceive most of the time, but which isn't an utterly liberating view.
Well, actually, a lot of people do get a realization, nature of the mind, but usually they don't have a clue what it's about. But at the same time, it can completely change their whole perception of what life is. And sometimes they're not grateful because they had everything nicely set up and thought they were doing well. And then suddenly this flash of insight, of deep, deep understanding of what really is going on. And they think, oh, blast, that's spoiled all that now, right? And now I have to go and find out what this is all about, because, this is true. And I don't know what it's going on with, but I need to find a teacher. It happened. And because the mind is not grasping at getting realizations or even thinking about it, the mind is probably at that time completely alert but relaxed. And so then the experience arises. But then when we go hunting for it, we create once more this very dualistic split. That's the quandary. You have to want it on one hand. On the other hand, if you do want it, you've already, closed the door. Yes, sorry.
No, I thank you so much. The second verse is the supreme spiritual discipline is to tame one's mind. And
of course.
Well, and you've spoken about how once you have good samatha, tranquility, that the rest of the practice is in the palm of your hands. And how would you recommend moderns cultivate good samatha? How much retreat is necessary? And do you have a particular approach you recommend to, say, the breath as a meditation object, or what object you usually advise people towards?
Well, I do think, Ajahn, that it's really good that nowadays people are beginning to recognize the usefulness of having a well-tamed mind. Before we do all these other exciting practices, how can we do them if we have a monkey mind? And so the practice of shamatha now, I think it's becoming more and more understood for its great benefits as if a well-tamed mind. A well-tamed mind also means a mind which is, what can I say, pliable, which is able to be workable, as the Tibetans say. We can do with it what we want to do instead of the mind just doing what it wants to do. And so the best approach to that would be shamatha. Obviously, nowadays, most people are not able to spend years and years practicing shamatha in a retreat situation. But of course, in that case, there's also the point with shamatha is that increases our awareness, our mindfulness. And so then to try to use, to be as clear and present and aware as possible throughout the day is very, very helpful. I think normally in the Tibetan tradition, they start like everybody else with the breath, but then also sometimes sound. And then when the awareness, when our mindfulness is clear, then to focus on the mind stream itself, and to really just sit back, as I always say, on the banks of the river, not damming the river, but allowing the river to flow, but not being immersed in the river, just watching it. And that is still shamatha. And sometimes, because the emphasis is on the awareness rather than the object of the awareness, so if the awareness is very clear, then to drop the object, whether the breath or the sound or the mind, and just be aware of being aware. So in that way, shamatha really is the sine qua non, because really if our minds are untamed, nothing which we practice will really bring any fruition, because we are not merged with that object.
Venerable, the third of these Atisha verses is that the supreme great quality is altruism. And there's a famous Theravada sutta called the Firebrand, where the Buddha talks about 4 different types of people. There's someone who works or practices for neither their own benefit nor the benefit of others. There's someone who works for the benefit of others, but not for their own benefit. There's someone who works for their own benefit, but not for the benefit of others. And then the 4th type, which the Buddha does agree is the best, is someone who works both for their own benefit and for the benefit of others. But I think there's a strong number of Theravadins who are content with this 3rd one of working for their own benefit, but not for the benefit of others. And that the Buddha, in this sutta agrees that that is superior to working for the benefit of others, but not for one's own benefit. So what do you think about that, this kind of stack ordering, and that working for one's own benefit is better than working?
I think we have to do both, don't we? I mean, like when you look at the Brahma Viharas, right? The Buddha said you start by giving, metta and compassion and so forth to yourself. And then from that to those you love, are indifferent towards, don't like, and to everybody. But we have to start, I think, really by making friends with ourselves. And of course, we breathe in and then we breathe out, right? I mean, we don't always keep breathing in, otherwise we'll, suffocate. So we give to ourselves, and then we share that with others. I mean, people who are like social workers and very kind, good-hearted people, giving. In the end, they burn out.
Right.
It becomes overwhelming. And so it's very important not only to give out to others, but also to give to oneself, and be, that way there is a balance and one can keep going. It's like with a mobile phone. You have to plug it in and recharge, right? If we just keep using and never recharging, then it goes flat. So, I mean, the skillful way is to breathe in and breathe out.
Venerable, I believe, 9th verse is the supreme generosity is non-attachment. And I'm curious who you feel has embodied this most in your life, or if you have any impressions from the teachers you've studied with or been impacted by about this quality of supreme generosity, of non-attachment.
Well, the person that comes immediately to my mind when you say that was a Swami, a Hindu monk whom I knew. And he lived in he had an ashram, but made of mud brick. And he just wore, like many sadhus do, just a very simple cotton robe. But this was many, many years ago, before India allowed in any luxury goods. It was a time when there really was nothing much for electrical equipment or any kind of gadgets and things like that. They didn't have any of that, and people would bring them in when they came. And so he had a number of quite wealthy Punjabi students, and they would come and they would offer their guru, something really nice. And he would look with such delight when he saw it, like a child with a teddy bear. Oh, look. And he would play with it and look at it and really appreciate it. And they'd be sitting there smiling because they'd given him something he really liked. And then he would look out over his students. Which one would like this most? And, oh, yeah, you come. Here you are. And he would just give it away. But to my mind, that was so beautiful. He didn't say, oh, don't give me these things. I'm a sadhu. I don't, care about mundane things. He showed delight. So they were happy, his sponsors. But he really didn't want it, right? He was just happy to give it to somebody else. So that's my feeling, is that this not having sticky fingers.
Venerable, one of the trainings, one of the trainings is that the supreme conduct is to be in disharmony with the world. And at first I thought that was a misprint until I heard you.
Everybody does.
Yeah. But so what does that mean? How does one do that? I mean, it is like, as monastics,
you are living in disharmony with the world. Come on, Ajahns.
Yeah, totally. No, I love it. But how does someone, outside of a monastic context, do that in a way which is healthy and not antisocial?
Yeah, no. I think what he meant, because everybody goes, oh, when they read that one. I think Atisha had a good sense of humor, because he turns a lot of these labels right round. But I think what he meant was to be in disharmony with the values of the world. I mean, the world is thinking the most important thing is to get more and more and more, and to get a bigger and bigger me, and in every way to exploit the situation as much as one can. And as you know very well, the way of the Dharma is to let go, to release, to delight in giving rather than receiving. And, this is not in harmony with the world's ideas, which is that, if you're a success in life, it means that you have a big house, a big car, a big this, a big that. Everybody thinks you're wonderful, or at least, you're a power source. And, this is the very opposite of a Dharma mind. I mean, a Dharma mind should be like Teflon, right? It's non-stick.
Thank you, Venerable. How would you, actually, to follow up on that, how would you recommend someone living in a partnership with, say, a non-Dharma practitioner, of which we have many in the community? How do they navigate that dynamic without alienating those in their life, holding, as one practices, often one's path diverges from old friends, old companions. How does one approach that movement beautifully and with a compassionate heart?
Well, I mean, we are not judging others. We're only trying to simplify our own lives. And so what others do, we recognize. I think it's very important to remember that it is always said that all beings want happiness. And so if they are happy with what they have and what they're acquiring and the way they're living, then we rejoice for them. We're happy that they're happy. It doesn't mean we sit there sniffing and looking disapproving. We're not judging anybody. If that brings them happiness, may they be well and happy. But for ourselves, we see a different way to go that is calling us, which speaks deeply to our heart. And from our heart, it reaches out to our speech and our conduct. But because we are doing this doesn't mean everybody else has to do it too. I mean, even in the time of the Buddha, there were a lot of people who didn't agree with him at all. And, it didn't trouble him. They could do what they wanted to do. He would do what he felt he wanted to do. And so that's it. I mean, we're not judging others, but we ourselves are trying to clear the path so that we can keep walking.
Venerable, one of these teachings is the supreme accomplishment is the continual decrease of unwholesome, disturbing emotions. And you tell this story about this, I think it may be 11th century, 13th century practitioner, Gyalwa Gotsangpa.
Oh, my hero.
Yeah. So his father dies. He was raised by his father. His father dies. And then he makes a vow that I will never again be sad. And is that feasible? I mean, how much how much strength of mind? I mean, yeah. I mean, how does one do that without just, fooling oneself or kind of just hiding parts of their psyche from themselves?
Well, I think for the average person, it's a little optimistic. But Gotsangpa was very extraordinary. He lived for years in Ladakh on stones because he was up in a cave and there was no food. So the Tibetans have a thing called doitrian, taking the essence from certain stones. So you kind of suck them, and he lived for years like that. I mean, he wasn't just, any old guy. He was very special. But he made the determination that he, because he grieved so much, it was so painful for him when he lost his father, because they were going on pilgrimage together and they were very close. And he just felt so much pain at his attachment that he just made a determination right there and then that he would never allow his mind to sink down into such depths of grief and attachment ever again. And so he didn't.
Venerable, the verses 15 and 16 are, the supreme spiritual teacher is the one who exposes our hidden flaws, and the supreme instruction is the one that helps us to strike at those flaws. And I'm curious, speaking of or spiritual teachers, if you could describe your first meeting with your root teacher, the 8th Kamtrul Rinpoche, and maybe what gave you faith in him. And if there's a story or anything that comes to mind, then obviously we'd love to hear it.
Well, I mean, it was when I was in England and became a Buddhist, and then somehow or other, somewhat to my dismay, got involved with Tibetan Buddhism, which nobody knew anything about in those days anyway. This was back in the early 60s. I realized, I mean, I don't know. I look back now and think, how did I think? But I just knew I had to go to India because my Lama was there. And I didn't doubt it. I just knew he was there. I just had to go and find him. So when finally, just hearing his name for the first time, I just, you know, as they say, faith spontaneously arose. And I asked, who is this Lama? And they said, well, you know, yes, it's a very high Kagyu Lama and he's coming and we're waiting for him. So we waited all through May and then we waited all through June and he didn't come. And then on the last day of June, which was my 21st birthday, then he called up and said, okay, we're at the bus station. So as soon as I saw him, I didn't actually see him. I was too nervous. I looked at his brown shoes. But when I did see him, when I looked at him finally, it was really just like meeting someone that you haven't seen for a long time, like an old friend. And also as if the very center of my heart mind, the nature of the mind, so to say, Dhammakaya, had suddenly taken manifest form in front of me, that he had always been there, but now he was there. So I mean, I never felt that with anyone else. And he really was like a Buddha in so many ways. He was big, but he was very soft, very gentle, very quiet, didn't speak much, but was really very good at organizing. Because he had a community, he had a monastery, but also a lay community who had come out of Tibet when they realized he wasn't going to return to his monastery. Then a lot of the lay people also escaped and came to where he was and said, well, you're a Lama, take care of me. So that's why up to now, our nunnery is affiliated with that monastery and with the lay people. And so it's like a family. It's very nice. You know, we have monks, nuns, lay people, and everybody is all very interconnected with the lineage. Unfortunately, he died when he was 49, which was much too early. But the present one is now about 44. So we've got a new one, right? So.
Well, Venerable, so in the Theravada, we've got, you know, these three refuges, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And then as we hear in Tibetan, there is this fourth jewel, this fourth refuge of the guru, the teacher. And I'm curious how one is to relate to that, because we don't have it in the Theravada. How necessary is it? How safe is it? How feasible is it for an average practitioner, say in the West, to find a guru with which they can hold at the same level as the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha? Is it necessary? Is it possible? Is it, safe?
Yeah, I mean, in the best of all possible worlds, it is very possible. I mean, of course, we have seen some bad hiccups along the way because, you know, once you have chosen your guru, you're supposed to see him as faultless. And of course, that can be very, very dangerous. It depends on who the guru is. The idea is that the guru his mind is Buddha mind, as is all of us, but he knows it and we don't. His speech is dharma, and his his body is as a monk or a lama, then that represents a sangha. So he represents the three jewels. Therefore, he goes first, the guru, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And the idea is, and I think it's very true, but again, of course, one has to be very careful. And even in the Vajrayana, it says you should test your teacher up to 12 years. I mean, nobody really does it for 12 years, but the idea is don't just, jump in as I did. First you have to really test it, like they say, like you would, a goldsmith would test gold to make sure it's pure and genuine and not a fake. So, but the idea is that if one example is like the sun shining in the sky, and the sun is incredibly, incredibly powerful. But if one put a piece of paper on the ground, even the hottest sun will do is to make it kind of a bit dry and crinkly. But if you put a magnifying glass between the rays of the sun and that paper, very quickly it will start to go brown and smoke and then burst into flames. So it's considered like the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are like the sun, but we cannot really get all the benefit because we're so ignorant. But the guru is like the magnifying glass. He takes all the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and brings them down to us. So that if we on our side have devotion, the Lama's blessings are always there. So then the two go together, and one gains realizations of the nature of the mind. That's, I mean, and when the guru is a genuine guru, and most of them are, some of them are more advanced than others, obviously. But if you get a really, really good one, it's true. I mean, they are very, very, there's a very, very palpable blessing from just being in their presence, even if you can't say anything. It's nothing to do with words. It's a mind-to-mind transmission.
You speak about this image, Venerable, of the sunlight and focusing it through a magnifying glass in the guru. And of all the images the Buddha gave of the enlightened mind in the Pali Canon, light that lands on nothing has always been the most striking to me. And it's interesting because in terms of speaking of Nibbana and ultimate reality, in the Pali Canon, it's very, the Buddha really did leave this absence of language around that space. And yet in the Vajrayana, and I think powerfully so, you do hear about that's not a blank nothingness and it moves, or rather it doesn't move, that's the wrong way to put it, but the idea that many of these gurus are acting at least in line with that deeper resonance. As you can see, like I come up against a wall with the Theravada language and trying to reconcile it with these bodhisattva understandings. I wondered if you could help provide a bridge at all, if there is a bridge to be provided between the Theravada concept of Nibbana and the Mahayana concept of the Buddha mind.
Bodhicitta, maybe?
Bodhicitta might be a better one too.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think what the Mahayana view was that the at the end of the day, we have to recognize that we are here not just for our own benefit, but in order to share what we have with others. I mean, it's like a doctor. If you're a medical student, are you just studying all that time just so that should you get a cold, you'll know what to do to help yourself? No, you're doing all this study and practice in order that you can spend your life being of benefit to others. And so that whether it was simultaneous with the Buddha or later understanding, I don't know, who can say, but there was a recognition that it's in a way a contrary idea that we are trying to become selfless in order to save ourselves only. And that where is the because when one realizes the nature of the mind, everybody agrees. One of the main points is this sense of the dropping of boundaries, that there's this deep inner knowing of our interconnection with everything. And therefore, it doesn't make sense to think that I can be liberated and everybody else can keep on burning in the burning house, right? You have to get out in order to help everybody else get out. I mean, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Especially if we're talking about being selfless. How can you be selfless and then well, this just is me, and too bad about you. I'm a good example. Now you go ahead and try. I mean, we have to reach out to try to help others. And I think that was a really important recognition of our interconnection and why are we trying to gain spiritual realization and liberation, if not in order to benefit all other beings who are still caught in the prison.
Thank you.
Yeah, somewhat related to this training of the supreme effort is letting go of activity. I mean, it's beautiful, certainly on the level of mind. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, just simplify the mind, just letting go of proliferation and letting go of unnecessary fabrication. But also, I mean, a traditional monastic life is one of minimal activity, and, we're starting a monastery, and you're involved with the international network of engaged Buddhists. But how does one reconcile these things, letting go of activity, but also having a level of engagement with society, whether it's starting monasteries or doing other things which engaged Buddhists do?
Well, again, I think that Atisha's being a little bit playful, right? The best activity is no activity. But what it means is, I think, I don't know because I'm not Atisha, but I think that, especially in practice, that there should be no striving. I mean, normally when we are doing a practice and on retreat or anything, we are, the idea of virya and, go plowing ahead and trying, and then we got this level, and then you have to get to that level, and then you get to that level. Let it go and just be. I mean, in both Mahamudra and Dzogchen, there is a lot of talk about being effortless, and that if we are too orientated to the idea of a goal, then that in itself becomes a hindrance. And so what we have to do is to relax the mind and just allow things to come and know them without this striving, which again is usually ego propelled. I want to get something out of this retreat. I want to be, get some realization of something. And then that creates a boundary. I mean, it creates a bondage, really, because then we're just, because usually, as I just said, I mean, it's actually the ego in charge here. So the ego wants to be spiritual, which is a contradiction in terms.
I think one of the best lines from the talks you gave on these verses was the ego is perfectly happy to be miserable, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, the ego is there. I mean, and so the important thing, which I think the Buddha recognized and which is not emphasized enough, is that in the beginning, everything we do is dominated by the ego. I mean, you'll have to be on a very high spiritual level, an arahat or 8th level bodhisattva, before there's no ego there. In the meantime, you've got the ego. So then our sense of self, at least we should make it into a friendly, happy sense of self, because then it can, walk along the path. If we're always thinking that we have to get beyond the self, who is saying there's no self if not the self?
And speaking of this ego, and hearkening back to the question of Mahayana conception of path and Theravada, and I'm aware that there may be only so far those different streams of language can go and touch, and I think you speak about it very skillfully, Venerable. And yet I'm still very interested in, certainly I see the Bodhicitta emphasis on it as a profoundly meaningful way of setting down the ego, and certainly our broadening of our conception of our path to include cultivating a community here has been deeply meaningful to me. When you speak about the desire or the goal to save all sentient beings, is this a skillful means, or is it something where we're talking about something in that place beyond the prison where perhaps it's really hard to use language to speak about exactly what's going on in the Buddha mind and the enlightened mind? And is this where language really, Theravada or Mahayana, begins to touch something we can't quite push past?
Can we just save all the people in Seattle?
Yeah, I mean, of course, in the Diamond Sutra, it is explicitly says that while we vow to save all sentient beings, we also recognize there are no sentient beings to be saved. Because, I mean, that's you're back to your egos again, right? So ultimately, the empty nature of a reality, there's no beings. But while there are no beings, nonetheless, we are vowed to save them. So there's always that kind of play of concepts so that we don't grasp it yet again, right? I mean, the main problem, as you know very well, is that the ego grasps. And as the Buddha said, that's the cause of our suffering. We always want to hold on there and get things exactly how we think they should be, where it's all literally beyond mind. That's why these breakthroughs are so important, because for a moment we see it so obvious, and then, we lose it again with our conceptual thinking wants to grasp onto what we, for a moment, saw, like a flash of lightning in the dark of the night. It lights everything up and then back to dark again.
I wondered if you had any kind of words for Ajahn Kovilo and myself, and just kind of encouragement for us who are still running along the side of the prison.
The thing is to be who you are. And that encourages, I think people are much more influenced by someone's behavior than ever anything you say, right? I mean, and, if you from your side are genuine monks, which of course you are, and happy with being genuine monks, then that encourages people enormously. You don't really have to do anything. You just have to be yourselves. And then people feel, oh, look, they're nice. They're basically perfectly normal, almost, even though they dress so funny. And then they think, oh, look, they look okay. They look quite happy. Why are they happy when they don't have any of the things which we are told we absolutely must have in order to be satisfied? How come they look okay? I mean, this, I think, is the importance of monasticism, that all the things which society are telling us are indispensable for our happiness have mostly been let go of and renounced, and yet they look so happy. How can it be? And then people start to question their own assumptions to try to find out why should they look so happy when they don't have any of the things which are supposed to give us joy. So that, I think, is really the great role, especially in the West, where people have so little examples, even in Dharma circles, of a monastic life well lived, and the joy that comes from the monastic life, the inner joy. I mean, that repudiates everything which society is telling us. So well done, Ajahns. Really well done.
Thank you,
Sadhu,
Jetsunma.
sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu. Thank you so much, Jetsunma.
And should you ever come to India, please do come up to Himachal. The Dalai
would-
Lama is 2 hours away, but we would love to welcome you to our nunnery.
Thank you.
We would love to do that, Venerable. And obviously, if you happen to find yourself in Seattle, or we can fly you here, we would be delighted to. So, okay. Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you, Ajahns. Lovely to see you again.